I have to believe your story because something happened to me years ago when I was in New York. I was on 5th Avenue near Central Park and walked toward Lower Manhattan. I went maybe 3 blocks and decided to cut over to 4th to the east. I turned a corner, not into an alley, but a regular cross street, and the second I took one step into it, I was shocked into standing still. The buildings and cars were all gone. The noise of the city was also gone. There were just trees and a field to my right. A dirt road was where the paved street and sidewalk had been. I was standing on the dry dirt. The road was full of deep ruts. Further down the road was a dark brown house with a low fence in front. On the road at least a block away, a horse-drawn buckboard full of wood crates was creaking and bouncing on the rutted dirt road. I was overwhelmed with panic when I saw this. My mind raced. What if I was trapped there forever? I was dressed in a shorter skirt. I didn't speak what many people spoke, or at least the way that they spoke. I had visions of being thrown into an asylum for the insane and being lost there for the rest of my life. I quickly walked backwards, and instantly I was back on 5th Avenue. A man slammed into my back since I was walking in reverse. I mumbled an apology. The street that I had just backed out of looked normal. The traffic was loud. My heart was pounding, and I stopped a cab and got out of the city as fast as I could. Even though it was fascinating, it was also terrifying. So yeah, I do believe in time slips. Back in 2018, my dad and I went to explore an abandoned manor house. When we got there, we climbed over the gate whilst looking for the manor. To our right there was nothing but fields, and to our left was the back of a large manor house with the lights on in almost every room. There were cars parked at the back of a very well-lit, clean and beautiful, and very clean, lived-in home. We snuck past trying to find the abandoned manor, thinking that it must be up ahead, but to no avail. So we crept back the same way and back over the gates, but we were still out of luck. As we walked down the road a couple of more seconds, we noticed the front of the abandoned manor we were looking for and proceeded to explore it. After exploring a clearly abandoned, old derelict building, we then realized that we were coming out the back and down the same lane, and that it was the same gate that we had jumped over previously. What we had seen earlier was in fact the same manor that was there previously, but nothing to the left or the right of the abandoned manor, or at least not the 4 fields that we had seen earlier. To this day we know what we saw, and must have first seen how the manor looked when it was up to date and operational. But later, as we went around to the front, we saw the present day manor, old and abandoned. Weird. This by no means is the strangest story you'll find on this subreddit, but my family and I still talk about it from time to time, and it's always stuck with us as quite odd. So the story starts during a family road trip circa 2015. I am about 14 and my sister is about 12. My dad has planned an extravagant excursion touring 5 fabulous locations around the Four Corners area of the American Southwest. During the final leg of the trip, we were driving from Mesa Verde, Colorado to Albuquerque, New Mexico. The drive is mostly through rural New Mexico along the desolate desert highway. My family is from a city in the Midwest, so we have never seen this type of emptiness before. There is just pure nothing. No gas stations, no fast food, no other cars. It's just us driving along this lonesome highway. We're almost just sitting there in silence, admiring the strange environment that we find ourselves in. We have been driving for quite a while, 15, 20 miles, who knows, without any signs of life, when lo and behold, what do I see? A solitary man dribbling a basketball along the opposite side of the highway. There was no one else around, and nowhere he could have feasibly come from. Additionally, as far as I could tell, he had no water with him at all, which was unusual considering it was a hot, dry day. I watched him as we continued driving. It is clear that the other people in the car acknowledged his existence, my family. But no one said anything. I brushed it off. Perhaps I imagined him, or it was some strange desert mirage, if that was even possible. I don't think about it again until 10 or so miles down the road. This is simply a guess. Nobody bothered to look at the time or check the mile markers. When I see something that made me question my own sanity. The same man was walking along the opposite side of the highway, dribbling a basketball. This time my mom speaks up. "Did you guys see that?" We all nodded in agreement. "Did you guys see that other one too?" And we nod again, all of us in unison. Throughout the years, we had proposed a lot of different explanations for this incident. Perhaps they were not the same man and they were just wearing similar clothes. Maybe they were both walking to or from a basketball practice or a game and they were wearing a uniform. But that does not explain why they were so far apart. And we did not see any buildings in the area they were walking. Also, if they were playing basketball, they should have had water bottles with them, shouldn't they? Maybe they were doing some sort of charity event. The type where people pledge money if you walk a certain distance. Maybe in the state of New Mexico it's just common practice to bring a basketball with you if you're walking a long distance so that you don't die of boredom. I don't know. All of our logical explanations seem to either be very anecdotal or very flawed in some way. Quite honestly, if my family didn't also see it, I would believe that I actually was hallucinating and that it didn't happen. I would like to believe that it was some sort of a glitch in the Matrix type thing. Nobody bothered to remember the time or mile marker, so perhaps we were transported back in time a little bit, you know? Maybe it was some kind of a time loop or some kind of a time tunnel that we traveled through, and we saw the same thing in a different way. After all, we were in a flat open desert, so there were no distinguishing features except for the man to let us know we'd been there before. Perhaps two universes had collided, and in one universe the man left wherever he came from slightly later. So he was at two different locations along the highway. Maybe I'm making this situation into something that it's not. Maybe somewhere out there is a logical explanation for this. Nevertheless, I'd like to believe that they don't call New Mexico the land of enchantment for no reason. I wish to relate something that happened to me and a friend a while ago. First, I am 32 years old, and I currently live in Pennsylvania, but I am originally from Ohio. I am often skeptical of weird stuff that I hear, but after listening to the Mysterious Universe podcast, I had to open my mind back up a little bit about the supernatural, things like spirits, ghosts, or other things. So on to my account. Back in September of 2008, my best friend Sierra and I went to a park named Hocking Hills in Ohio for a day retreat from our busy lives. We had decided on this at random when we first got together earlier in the morning just after sunrise. It was a nice warm late summer day, and we'd just got this wild notion to go for a drive to Hocking Hills since the area is well known for its several walking trails, a cave or two, and several waterfalls and running water in the area, creeks. The day was very warm, maybe roughly about 70 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe 21 degrees Celsius, so we had worn shorts and short-sleeved t-shirts. The park was full of people, and there were walking families, couples, and a lot more all over the place. We started down a trail we had taken many times before, one that would force us to cross a paved road near its end in order to continue, and we also played with our mobile phones. I remember it was roughly around 12, and we kept walking forward around a small hill and up a steeper part of the trail which was near the road. As we walked, we were passed by a group of backpackers before we reached the road, and one of those people turned around to warn us to be aware of a washout up ahead if we were going to take the trail into the woods across the road. They recommended we follow the one next to the fire tower instead, as it bypassed a small clump of down brush. The guy pointed to a small branch off the main trail to our left and told us good luck, or something to that effect. We walked up the little trail, and I remember Sierra stating the path we were on wasn't showing up on her park map application on her phone. I recall telling her it was most likely new and something done for the washout. That was about the end of our conversation, and we moved on. We crossed under where the power lines were strung up into another part of the woods and ended up near the road. As we crossed it to the tower trail just across from where we stood, I noticed there was caution tape all over the fire tower. There was a pungent smell in the air which we could not identify. The windows on top of the tower appeared to be taped up, grimy, and there were flies all over the area. We walked past it, commenting how odd it was, and continued down the trail we had been recommended to take. But it was one neither of us had noticed before on a previous walk to the area. This trail took us past the fire tower and then cut into the woodlands. As we walked into the forest, maybe a couple of 100 feet or so, we took notice that no one seemed to be around. In fact, not only did we feel isolated from others, but we felt very chilled with no explanation. Sierra pointed out verbally while I was thinking, but we just continued walking. Eventually the air started to get noticeably colder and chillier, and also damper. This did not seem unusual at first, but as we continued to walk, the air seemed to go from warm to what felt like the mid-50s in Fahrenheit or in the 10s for Celsius, and at that point we started to shiver. It was also getting darker as we continued forward. At first I thought it was because of the tree leaves covering us, or maybe a passing cloud overhead, but the darkness really did not improve as one expected. As we walked, we looked around and there was nothing but trees on all sides. There should have been a forest edge somewhere, as the area wasn't really that big, but aside from some hills and tall pine trees, there was no ending to these woods in sight. We expected to see the edge near the road. My friend took out her phone to use her GPS because she instinctively felt lost, but her battery was nearly gone. I took mine out of my back pocket and it was also nearly dead. The clock on it showed EEEE for the time, meaning it could not update as it was an older style slide phone with keyboard and camera that, when set to auto adjust, would contact the mobile phone network every 15 minutes for time updates. It was only then, as the light grew dimmer, that I noticed the area seemed to be so silent. Our footsteps, the leaves we stepped on, the grass, the twigs, and our breathing just echoed, but there were no animals or anything making any noise at all. It was eerily quiet. It was too quiet. Sierra got spooked, and so did I. She mentioned that it was very out of the ordinary, and I agreed, but I couldn't shake the sense of foreboding that something was amiss and something was going terribly wrong. I tried to rationalize it, but I honestly really could not figure any of it out at all. We just pressed onward, and after going down a small hill and back up, it seemed to have gotten a lot darker, like just near sunset dark. My friend grabbed my arm and started freaking out about how weird it got. Then the air seemed to have gone still, and we had a feeling of something being very wrong. She dragged me as she took off running forward for an exit. For some reason, we never thought about turning around at all and going back the same way that we came. It never seemed to occur to us as we ran, but the spookiness continued as we could hear our steps echo off the area as things just felt like they grew more gloomy. Then ahead of us, down another small dip in the trail, we could see 2 large honeysuckle bushes on either side of the trail, like a gate. We made a mad dash for these bushes, and just as we pushed through the plants, something odd happened. We were overwhelmed by a change in our surroundings, as light, sound, and warmth returned all at once. It was like stepping outside of a cold, empty, and dark building to a warm, busy street. We stood at the edge of a place known as Ash Cave, which has a large waterfall not too far away with a U-shaped cliff. I turned around to look back from where we emerged, and while the bushes were the same, the area was so different, brighter, not silent for sure because there were hikers near the falls, and warmer. In fact, our skin was cold to touch, which just reinforced the strangeness. We took a moment to rest from that little run. Logic attempted to set in, and we decided the trail we came up must have just appeared out of nowhere because there were many clouds overhead, or a storm blew by us or something, and when we went back the bushes were there but the trail wasn't. Nothing looked like it had a few seconds ago. Sierra walked around the bushes twice, and it was the same bright sunny day with no darkness and no trail. We waited. It was a blue sky overhead, and we could see the edge of the forest and other people. The trail had simply vanished as if we had never walked it at all. On returning to the normal trail we were used to taking and headed back, we took our phones and the time had finally updated. It was now 4 p.m. The normal trail would have only taken an hour to walk fully, so it was a loss of about 3 hours. When we ended back near the fire tower on the normal trail, we noticed that it was normal looking as the windows were no longer taped and it was very crystal clean and there was no pungent smell. We don't know what it was, but it was certainly creepy. Of course, I jokingly told her later that day over dinner that we had entered the fairy realm by mistake and were lucky to get away. She didn't find that funny at all, of course, but either way, we were both happy that this ordeal was over. I wonder if anybody else has had a similar experience and perhaps they can provide some insight and share their own story. Some friends and I used to drink in this really old, abandoned, dilapidated farmhouse that was about a half an hour walk out of our hometown of Coaldale, Alberta, Canada. It was a place we could drink and chill all night and not have to worry about cops and stuff like that. Although the house itself was a bit dangerous, if you know what I mean, because it was totally collapsed everywhere. As I mentioned, it was dilapidated and pretty much falling apart. We always sat on top as it was the least amount of debris, and there was a nice wide open area where we could all sit in a circle. We'd bring a flashlight, but we would turn it off since we got up in our little area upstairs, just in case somebody happened to drive by and notice something suspicious might be happening. Although not even once did a car drive by, ever, on any nights where we were. And if they did, it would have been noticeable. It was miles away from any other light source and was dead quiet other than the crickets chirping. Anyways, one night, I'm pretty sure that it was a Saturday, probably around 2 or 3 in the morning, or around there was a group of 7 or 8 of us, and we heard the door open, and we heard some chatter. We were like, oh, who the heck is that? And we quickly hid our booze, sat as still and quiet as we could, and hoped that nobody was going to come upstairs. They did. And this is where it gets really, really, really weird. Although it was dark with no lights, we could easily see each other across the room because of the moon and the starlight. This Hutterite family, and for those who don't know who the Hutterites are, they're sort of like the Amish folk, are all basically wearing the same style clothes, and they live in colonies and farms and stuff like that. They come walking up the stairs. They were chattering to each other, but it wasn't in English. I think it might have been German, but I really can't say except the 2 little girls, I guess they were around 6 or 7, they were speaking in plain English to each other. They come up into the open room where we were and started looking around. We were crapping our pants at this point. There was no way in hell they would not be able to see us just sitting there in a circle, but they didn't. They would look right at you, but it was almost like they were looking through you, like we didn't even exist. At one point, one of the little girls was standing right in front of me and said excitedly, "This is going to be my room." We were all just sitting there frozen solid, looking at each other like, is this really happening? They continued to just kind of walk around and look at stuff. It seemed like they were checking out a new house they were going to move into or something, but if you saw the state of the house, you'd know 100% that that was not the case. It was by far beyond repair. Oh, and as I mentioned before, it was 3 a.m. on a Sunday morning. Why would anybody bring their family to look at a dilapidated house that early with no electricity and no lights? So they walk around for about 10 minutes or so chatting away, seemingly oblivious to us, and again there was no way they couldn't see us. But finally they walked back down the stairs. We heard the door open and shut, and silence. No vehicle driving away, nothing. Just crickets again. We were like, did that just happen? Where the hell did they even go? A few of us decided to investigate. We go downstairs with our trusty flashlight, go outside, and there's nothing. No vehicle, no tire tracks in the gravel road, no people, no vehicle driving away, nobody's walking away, just nothing. This wasn't even a minute after we heard the door shut. If they were on foot, they wouldn't have made it that far. If they were driving, we would have seen or heard the vehicle pull up, and also we would have heard it drive away. And this was flat open prairie grassland. You can see for miles. We would have been able to see either these people walking away or driving in a car without any doubt at all. There is no way that they just disappeared like that. Some key points to take away from this very, very strange event is that this house was miles away from other houses. There was no vehicle. It was like we weren't even there. We looked sketchy. Seriously, we had mohawks, tattoos, piercings all over our faces, leather jackets with nails and stuff like that coming out of our clothing. There was just no way that they wouldn't have seen us in an abandoned house at night and not been scared of us at all. It was also 3 a.m. on a Sunday morning. Why the hell would you walk miles on foot through the mud, with young children mind you, to come check out an old dilapidated farmhouse at that time of the night without even so much as a flashlight? That house, last I heard, was still there, sideways from the wind from what I hear. There's no freaking way anybody in their right minds would go in to try to fix it up. It's been over 20 years, and everyone who was there is still scratching their heads as to what happened, because it was so strange. But that was only what I heard, that it was still there. I'm not sure if it actually is there though now. I tried finding it on Google Maps, but all the houses in the area are definitely occupied. And the last time I was in Coaldale was about 5 years ago. My girlfriend and I took a drive to see if it was still there, and it was. I'm thinking at this point it must have been torn down for a new house somewhat recently, unless I'm just looking in the wrong area. We did not expect anything paranormal was happening at any point while the family was there in front of us. They looked 100% real and solid and acted that way too. But it was like we did not even exist, and they couldn't see the shape the house was actually in, completely destroyed and dilapidated. They just walked out the door and even kind of slammed the door shut. We all heard it loud and clear when that happened, but the door was still in the exact same place it was when we got there. And there was no trace of anybody but us being there. Just our footprints going in and nothing going out. Never the footprints of these people anywhere. I live in an area north of Toronto called Thornhill. It's an older area, first discovered and settled in the mid-1700s, but mostly not developed until the mid to late 1800s. Over the years, there have been plenty of strange happenings in the area, and being born in the mid-80s and not having the internet as a child, I know about a lot of them. I never experienced anything weird beyond a light in the sky that was easily dismissed as a satellite, or a noise in the field near my house that was probably an opossum, which happened to me when I was close to the end of elementary school. In early spring in the 7th grade, my friend Andrew and I were walking over to his place after school to hang out for a bit. It wasn't too far from school, maybe about 1.5 kilometers. To get to his house, we had to walk through the area of Old Thornhill, called that because it's heritage buildings and almost cottage-like atmosphere. On the way to his house is an Anglican church with a public park and heritage house behind it. Not only did this happen to be sort of a shortcut to his house, it was also extremely creepy. We started walking down the path despite my objections, and made it past the clearing onto the heritage grounds. Here's what's really strange. There was a wedding going on right behind the house in the open field. Now there's benches and a plaque with historical information next to the path we had to take. Neither of us heard the wedding as we walked up or even noticed it until we were already there. Everyone was dressed amazingly. Men in fine suits, women in nice dresses, really old world looking garments, if you know what I mean. They just seemed out of place, like they didn't belong there, like they weren't from our time. Not wanting to disturb the party, Andrew and I snuck past and made it to the front of the gate, which turned out to be locked. We tried to lift the bike over the fence, but we couldn't get it over. Plus, I was fat as a kid, so there was no way that I was doing that either. So we gave up and went back to take the long way. The path we were on is only 30 or 40 feet from where the wedding was, so we walked back quietly. The strange thing was, when we looked over at where the group was, and where that wedding was supposed to be happening, there was nothing there at all. We walked back up the path over the yard. Nothing was there, not so much as a mark in the grass of a chair or a footprint in the dirt. I've been back there a few times since, but I've never seen anything unusual going on. Where did all the people go? How is it that we ran into a wedding that was going on, with people dressed very finely and looking very sophisticated in their old world appearance, and yet only a few minutes later there was nobody there to be seen at all? Is it possible, or is it in any way feasible that we somehow walked into some kind of an alternate timeline or alternate dimension, or moved into some other realm temporarily and then came back? I was driving to a friend's house tonight at around 9 p.m. It's only about a 10-minute drive or so, but I noticed something that was really weird and that was very off after about a minute of driving. There were no streetlights on that portion of the street. I thought they must have just been turned off or something, but these 5 or so streetlights on that portion are a fairly new addition to the road. My car has a squeaking noise that I'm trying to find and can't figure out, and I noticed that that sound wasn't happening anymore. I was thinking about how quiet everything was sounding as I was driving, and then I realized my tires were not making any noise at all, and I noticed this because my window was all the way down so I could hear everything coming and all the sounds from the outside as I was driving. I had mud tires as of last summer, which make a distinct rumbling and whirl sound while driving, but the tires I had before, those made no noise, and it sounded like I didn't have my mud tires on, like I was just driving on a regular set of tires. At this point I thought that something strange was going on, and when I pulled up to the next stoplight, I looked at the funeral home across the street and noticed that they had all flowering bushes in front of the building rather than the newly made parking spots. This light also just didn't change from red to green for about 3 minutes, with no other cars around this whole time. I just drove through the intersection because I thought it wouldn't be changing anytime soon. These changes I noticed are indicative of what my drive to my friend's house would have been about 3 to 5 years ago. Is it possible that I shifted back 3 to 5 years in time just driving through that street to my friend's house? Or maybe an alternate reality? Once I got to his house, everything was normal, and I told him about the events. Driving back home, everything was back to how it normally should have been, but I still can't explain all those odd occurrences and that feeling that I had that something was off. It was almost like I shifted to another time. A few years ago, must have been around 2015, I had a dream which I remembered ever since. In the dream, I was in a small village or town with my mother and my siblings. I don't know the place at the time I had this dream. In the dream, we walked through the town and to a beautiful beach that I also had never seen before in my life. I can recall that in the dream, there was a quiet and sad and depressed atmosphere, even though I didn't know why. In the past year, I always asked myself why I remember this dream, because I have a lot of weird dreams and this one seemed to be quite normal. The only thing odd about this dream is the fact that nearly every single one of my close family members was in it, except for my father and my younger brother. This is odd because I don't have the best contact with my family, but the few times they would see us, we made sure that they came. My 3 sisters and 4 brothers, which means that it could have been something like a family reunion. Even though it's kind of weird, I never thought this dream was scary in any way. Just a bit weird until about 1.5 years ago. I received a call from my crying mother, telling me that my father and younger brother, the one that was missing in my dream, had died in a car crash. Sadly, I was not as devastated about the loss as I wish I could tell. I mean, I was, but when my mother told me about planning to make the trip to Turkey to handle all the inheritances and things that have to come with this, I gladly accepted. I went to a small town near Marmaris, Turkey. When we arrived and walked through the town, I was shocked. It was the exact same place as in my dream, and also the beach was the same. My father and younger brother were not there, just like in the dream, and due to the circumstances, there was a very depressed atmosphere. I'm not saying that I saw into the future in my dream, but I cannot explain how this could have happened. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm not saying that I can see into the future because of this dream or saw into the future. However, the whole dream was very vivid, and arriving in that town, it was almost like I'd been there before because of that dream. It's just too bizarre to explain, the senses and the atmosphere and how everything was so somber. And I remembered it all. It was like a memory that I already had with me, something that I knew I was going to experience, and I was there. It was almost like I was in another realm in that dream. It was too lucid and too real to just be anything but a dream.